Grace to you all and peace in the name of the God who is, who was, and who is to come. And welcome to the 2024 edition of the Clerk of Session Workshop for the folks in Highlands Presbytery and folks from other presbyteries that are joining us. Great to have you with us today, and I'm sure it's going to be quite the informative morning for all of us. Before we introduce our guest for the day and move on to whatever she has to share with us, I thought we'd have a short devotion. When we think of Solomon, we often think of wisdom. And when we think of Solomon's wisdom, we often think of his recommendation that it's no big deal, just divide the baby in half, everybody's happy. We'll call it wisdom. That's what the scriptures call it. It's a little shaky to me, but still it worked. But before that moment was at least as impressive a moment of wisdom. And so I'll read that to you now from 1 Kings 3. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great faithfulness and love and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made me your servant king in place of David my father, although I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for their multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to govern this your great people?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In that short paragraph, Solomon shows all kinds of wisdom, asking for an understanding mind, recognizing the value of righteousness and justice. But in particular, I would like to point out that Solomon says, "I don't know." And that is as wise as any of us can ever hope to be, because that is often where we have to begin. We don't know everything, and we never will. But we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, people who are with us immediately, right near us, or people farther abroad, like all the way from Louisville, Kentucky. And whether they know more than we do or not isn't the question. It's not about more, it's that they know different than we do. They have different experiences, different study, different, not more, not less. They might call us for something we know because we know it better than they do. Some of us know bricks, some of us know mortar, and together we build a strong wall. But it's doing it together and using everyone's gifts. This is the third clerk of session workshop I've done in Highlands, and I've probably mentioned at least once, if not three times, that I am not memorize the book of order or Robert's rules kind of clerk. That's not me. I'm much happier keeping the trains running on time, making sure we do the things we're supposed to do. But if you sneak up on me and ask me what G30907 is, I will have to look it up, just like you could have. So that's the kind of clerk I am. But last year, I learned more about the new church discipline portion of the Book of Order than I ever wanted to know. But I learned it mostly by calling people in Kate's area code and saying, "Explain this to me, help me do this right, help me not to mess it up." And here we are today. Oftentimes, when I'm called to moderate a session meeting, sometimes someone will ask, can we, and they'll ask for permission to do something. And I'll say the magic words and we'll find out. Say, I move, and we'll see if you can do what you want to do. But as any fan of Harry Potter knows, no good magician has just one spell. Abracadabra only goes so far, even for Harry Potter. I move can make things happen. That's a great thing. But saying, I don't know, and particularly God, I don't know, can tell us why it should happen, why it shouldn't happen, how it can happen, and as much as anything else, tell us for whom we are doing it. God, I don't know, opens up every door. Let's pray. Holy One, you have blessed us by calling us together on a day when we have the opportunity to be fed in body and mind and spirit, however it is you lead us in this time together now, feeding our minds and our spirit, and giving us the chance, if we want, to go outside later and feed our bodies. You are so good, you really can chew gum and walk at the same time. You are so good that you can give us all of these things and wrap it around one date on the calendar. So thank you for this. And thank you for giving us the wisdom and the strength when we need it to admit we don't know, in all humility, without any shame or guilt, but to be the mortals you have made us to be, capable of being more and more every day, every minute, if we're open to your leading. Bless us in this and in our service to our churches. Bless Kate in her ministry to the denomination and to those with whom she works. Bless this church. Make us an instrument of peace in this world, so desperately in need of it. We pray all of this in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen. Well, it is my honor today to introduce Kate Trigger Duffert, who is the Director of General Assembly Planning for the Presbyterian Church USA. She was appointed to this role by the acting stated clerk of the PCUSA and confirmed as an associate stated clerk, director for GA planning by the General Assembly in 2024. And if you were watching on TV, you would have had a chance to see all of that happen, and it was an exciting time. And it was an especially exciting time for people like me who were blessed to have Kate as our boss during the General Assembly. In my first experience as a committee assistant, she not only made it fun and something I was capable of doing, but something I recommend to other folks and hope to do again in the future. Believe it or not, Kate has not spent her entire life working at the General Assembly, but she has worked in reforming institutions and innovative consulting and creative worship design for, among other places, Presbyterian women and denominational gatherings. I don't know if she's planning to sing to us this morning, but if she does, you're in for a treat. She's shaking her head no, but you never know how the Spirit's going to move. Kate is an ordained ruling elder, and she serves at the Beachmont Presbyterian Church in Louisville, where she lives with her husband, son, and 2 dogs. And she is quite familiar with this part of the world, although it's a little complicated. So if she wishes to explain it, she can tell all of you how that's come to be. But Kate, it is great to have you. I was excited to ask you to do this before I even went to General Assembly as a committee assistant. And every day while I was there and during our training beforehand, I thought, man, I'm glad I said, I don't know who to ask to do this. And I'm glad I landed on you. So thank you again, Kate, for being here.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. And you know far more about me than probably I do about myself sometimes. So thank you. And thank you to all of you for being here this morning. It is a privilege to be able to be with clerks of session. You're some of my favorite people in the church. So it's a joy to be able to spend time with you. I don't always get to do that except for my own clerk of session. But as Steve mentioned, I am very familiar with the Highlands area. I am the child of two Presbyterian pastors, and my parents were pastors in New Jersey for a number of years, and I was a member at First Pres in Rockaway, and I thought I saw Karen Basil on here. So I see your name, Karen. I know you're here. Hello. So it's a lot of fun to get to speak with you as a presbytery that is different than the one when I was there, as you are a newly formed presbytery, but is still one that I know and love. And I'm grateful to Steve because I get to talk to you about one of my other favorite things aside from clerks of session, which is the General Assembly. Uh, and I wanted to just start by talking a little bit about why the assembly matters to congregations, because I know that that doesn't always feel true. um, I am not unaware of that reality, that there is a distance that can be felt between what happens at the assembly and what's happening in your congregations. And so I just wanted to step back for a moment and share a couple of things that have really inspired me as I've done my work in General Assembly planning, that have grounded that connection between what's happening in the congregation and what's happening at the assembly, and then talk a little bit about this past assembly where, yes, Steve was one of the folks who was there helping us make that happen. So first, I think one of the most beautiful parts about our General Assembly is that none of the things that we're discussing have been established from someone who's on high. This is not a top-down way of doing our governance. Uh, our overtures that form the business of the assembly come from sessions and congregations that have an idea, that have something that they're concerned about, that have a new way of thinking that they want to bring to the larger church. And those then move through the presbyteries and then to the assembly for a conversation. So it's a really wonderful thing to be able to watch these nuggets of wisdom that come out of congregations be discussed by the whole of the body at the assembly, and really be embraced for larger conversation there. And then the decisions that are made really do impact what happens in every congregation. I'm sure that there are some that you feel are less important to your particular context, and there are some that are more important to your context, which is a testimony to the fact that the assembly addresses the diversity of needs of the church, that there are some that are going to speak and some that aren't in any particular moment. And I just want to highlight something that was said in that devotional about um, the idea that we have uh, different expertise, that we have bricks and mortars, and that's how we build our wall. I am so deeply passionate about the fact that the way we do church matters, that this process we've created of having bodies of people who gather together with their different ideas, and those are the people who make the decisions, that is reflective of our theology. So we don't have a general assembly because we like meetings. We don't have a general assembly because it feels like a nice time to get together for a big event. You know, we have it because it is a way for the whole of the church to come together and be in conversation about the needs of the whole of the church and try to discern where God is calling us to go. So it's a real privilege to be able to serve in my role, where I'm able to convene that space, where I'm able to find ways to make it accessible and equitable, and operate in a way that really enables the church to listen for God's voice. So the assembly is important. I promise. I will say that about a million times in my life because I know that not everyone is as ingrained in it as I am in my daily life. So uh, I do want to talk about what made this General Assembly unique. So some of you may have been there, some of you may have watched what happened or have just heard about it in a presbytery meeting. Um, this assembly was the first time when we were back together in person since 2018. So when COVID hit, obviously, like congregations, we had to pivot and think of a new way of doing our work together. Bless Zoom for making that happen in so many ways. And for 2020, our assembly was fully online. It was shifted the planning in like 3 months. Uh, and then in 2022, we were still in the midst of a lot of COVID precautions. And while some folks were in person, it was small groups, and there was never a moment when the whole body was together. For this assembly, we had our committees online. So there was that online factor continued to be a part of how we did the assembly, which was still new. Uh, but for plenary, we were able to all join together and be in person in Salt Lake City and have a large gathering of the body together. And it was really a wonderful experience to be able to see folks together, um, to be able to witness moments of community and discernment as well as joy. So you may have seen or the videos or images of people doing the electric slide in the middle of a business meeting. Wild. I don't know if that's something you do in your congregations, that you just bust out dancing in the middle of your session meetings. Maybe try it, but it was a great time. And it really was a wonderful space. And in that place, many important things happened. So um, the first thing that really shifted, I think, the direction of the church is that we were able to honor a stated clerk transition. So we are the outgoing stated clerk that had been elected was the Reverend Dr. J. Herbert Nelson, and he completed his term early in order to be closer to his family. And so the Committee on the Office of the General Assembly had appointed the Reverend Bronwyn Boswell, who was coming out of Virginia, to serve as the acting stated clerk. And she was the first woman to ever serve in that role. We had never had a woman serving as stated clerk. So she was there serving as the clerk throughout the assembly and was able then to make the handoff to the newly elected stated clerk, who is the Reverend Jihan O. And Jihan is the first woman elected to serve as the stated clerk. She's the first woman of color. She's the first Gen X. She's the first person who was born out of this country. There's a number of firsts that come with Jihan's leadership, and it really was something special to be able to be a part of that. And she's just an outstanding leader and brings such an immense balance of both compassion for the people of the church and an ability to say what needs to be said and give us direction. So I am just ecstatic that she is in her role and is leading us through the next few years. We also elected our co-moderators, who are Cece and Tony. You may have seen, those are our dancers, right? Cece's our big dancer. The co-moderators have already jumped in and begun their work of traveling around the country and connecting with folks. So that's something, if you are curious about inviting co-moderators, be in touch. They are happy to go places. So if you want to visit from the co-moderators to the presbytery and maybe to congregations while you're there, they love doing that and being in touch and being able to share their experience, the assembly, and hear what's happening in congregations and bring that back as well. So we had these pretty big historic things happening in how the assembly was shaped. And I think all of those contributed to a place where the assembly was really able to do discernment in a way that was very intentional and considered, and it was not maybe less caustic than it could be. There have been past assemblies, if you've attended maybe 10, 20 years ago, where there's been so much tension in the church that it has been hard to come to agreement, and people have left feeling a heaviness about the direction of the church. And I don't think that's what we left with from this assembly. there was a survey that was sent out to participants asking them for just insights on their the ways that they engaged and things we can do better, because we're always learning and trying to make the assembly better, but also just on how they felt when they left. And overwhelmingly, like 90% of people felt excited about the future of the church. That is not a narrative that I think we cling to enough. We talk a lot about decline in the church and about how about numbers and membership. And my sense leaving the assembly is the realization that, yes, that's real, that there are shifts in numbers and membership, that we are becoming a new church in many ways because of that, but that's a reformation rather than a loss in some ways, that is a chance for us to look at how we are the church together in new and unique ways, and that there's an excitement in that because God's doing something. And I would encourage you, if you have not had a chance to speak with the commissioners from your presbytery or folks who you know who were at the assembly, and ask them about how they felt leaving, just to hear that energy, because I think it's helpful to hear that larger energy coming out of the church for those moments when maybe what's happening in your local context can feel heavy, because that's real. I serve on the session of a church that has about 40 members. So we are small. We have a part-time pastor. There's a lot of challenges that come with that. And yet there's new things happening that are really wonderful. So just if you can plug into some of that movement that came out of the assembly, I really encourage you to do so as a way to think about how God may be moving your congregation as well, within the context of the larger Presbyterian Church. So we also had a lot of constitutional changes that were voted on for that book of order that I don't know that anyone's memorized, but I'm sure there's some folks who have. It's not me either. So, search functions are your friend when you have that PDF of the book of order. But we had several constitutional changes that were approved. There is a booklet on the changes that have been proposed for the Constitution that is available. You should probably be getting that from Steve at some point whenever your presbytery will be voting on those, because the presbyteries do have to ratify any of those constitutional changes that come out of the assembly. And many of those changes are codifying things that were already effectively in practice. For instance, one of the Book of Order changes says that there cannot be a non-disclosure agreement when a pastor ends their term of service. That was already something that the GA Permanent Judicial Council had made rulings on and had some standards for, but it wasn't in the Book of Order as an explicit statement. So that is not new, but is now more clear should it be approved by the presbyteries. One of the things that impacts the work that I do very directly is that there are two Book of Order changes related to the assembly. One is to change the ratio of how many commissioners are allotted based on presbytery membership. The ratio that is being recommended actually increases the number of commissioners that would be there for the next assembly, because you can have more commissioners for having fewer members. So this is an attempt to reflect kind of the shift of membership across the country. Another one is that in the past, when you were submitting an overture, one of those ideas that comes from the congregation to the assembly, presbyteries had to find at least one other presbytery to agree with them and sign on and concur before it would go to the assembly. There's a Book of Order change that would remove that requirement. So now you would not have to have someone else sign on in order to move to the assembly for discussion. Largely, this came out of the realization that there were some presbyteries who felt like everything should go to the assembly and they were going to concur no matter what. So why have this rule in place if people are going to concur and we're going to have everything come to the assembly? So that actually opens the doors for what things can come forward from presbyteries to be a little more expansive. So that's another one that is up for presbyteries to discern and ratify or not. There are some language changes around protected groups in the church that you can find. It's I don't remember the reference because I'm not a Book of Order rememberer. So, but it came out of item polity 01, which was split up into 2 items. One regarding the list of people that we cannot discriminate against and adding in LGBTQIA plus folks. And then the second part of that was heavily reflected on and amended and discussed about how we make sure that in our ordination process, we ensure that the people who go through that process are welcoming of all as well. So that is coming to presbyteries. And there's one piece in the amendment booklet and the things that you will have to vote on as a presbytery that is actually pretty unique in that it's not a Book of Order change, but it is a change with our ecumenical relationship with the Episcopal Church. So that is a long document. I mean, it's not that long, but it's a lot longer than a Book of Order clip, right? Of like 2 sentences, but it's 2 or 3 pages that are the outcome of years of dialogue between the Episcopal Church and the Presbyterian Church. And one of the unique things that they have landed on for this particular time is that while we do not have exact common understandings around how we structure ourselves, around ordination, and around our theological beliefs, we have enough in common that should this be approved, we believe as the PCUSA that Episcopal priests could serve in our contexts. So that goes both ways, that we also say that Presbyterian pastors who are teaching elders could serve as priests in Episcopal contexts. But this really shifts how we think about our continued relationship with ecumenical partners and the folks with whom we have full communion and the people who can join together in doing ministry and filling pulpits, as well as just building relationships between those congregations. So that's a pretty big shift for folks who are near a lot of Episcopal congregations, of being able to engage in really not just dialogue and mission together, but to be able to share that space of ministering. So that's something I would encourage you to read. It's one of the things I really like about it is it's a really great sort of primer on how we view ordination and our work in the Presbyterian Church, because it had to be explained to the Episcopalians in the same way that theirs then is explained to us. So there's like a glossary at the end that is really helpful. And if you're ever thinking of how do I define something, we had to define it to the Episcopalians, so maybe you can pull it out of there and helpful. That's one of the biggest things I think that is going to be a reality shift for some congregations right now, and that opens up doors. But there's a lot of things that happened at the assembly, a lot of business that came out that you can follow. We have on the OGA website, which I can send in the chat, we have something called the GA in brief, and maybe you've had a chance to see it, maybe not, but it is a document that is either bulletin sized or letter sized that you can print out or email to folks, that goes through some of the big things that were decided at this assembly, some of the outcomes. It has, in addition to just a little recap of what happened, it also has some questions about things you might want to think about or conversations you might want to have in your congregation around these topics. There are blurbs about the decisions around environmental divestment versus environmental conversation with fossil fuel organizations, and leading. So that conversation was basically, should we fully divest, or should we continue to remain engaged and try to encourage them to behave differently? So there's a little bit of information about how that conversation happened, about the conversations that happened on the floor around creating a national Korean caucus. There's some recaps of those historic election moments, but it's really a useful document that hopefully is accessible to folks and easy to find and easy to use. So if you have questions about some of the big things that happened from this assembly, that's a great place to start. If you are someone who really wants to get into the weeds, we have PC Biz, which is another website that has all of the items, and not only all the items, but like the entire path of every item. So we're talking the original overture, any amendments that came from committee, the final plenary decisions, all of it is in there. So pcbiz.org is a great place to go if you really want to go into the weeds of the actions that were taken and see what happened in the assembly. There are a couple of other things that have come out of the assembly that are ongoing, and these really were established in 2022. And you may have heard about these. Some of them came from your presbytery initially and were parts of your conversations. But we have a unification commission that is in place that is working to unify the Presbyterian Mission Agency and the Office of the General Assembly, which are two of 6 agencies that serve the church on the national level. That unification commission has been meeting since 2022. They've done a lot of groundwork of getting to know the people who work in these agencies, getting to understand the function of these agencies and what they serve. For the Presbyterian Mission Agency, that has been a lot of mission that has been outward towards the church. The Matthew 25 movement is something the Presbyterian Mission Agency manages, as well as World Mission, and Presbyterian Disaster. A lot of things live there. And the Office of the General Assembly is where folks like me have been working with not only planning the General Assembly itself, but the ordination process for our pastors, the CLC, which you've probably heard a lot about and been engaged in, of how we find one another and work through discerning where folks may want to serve. There's a lot of things, and immigration service, that's another thing that oddly has landed in the Office of the General Assembly. So there is a unification effort to put those two together, and that is being led by the commission. At the point where we're at now, the anticipated plan is to begin making some pretty significant changes over the next month or so with how the structure and the priorities of the organization function. So you may see some announcements about those shifts within kind of the denominational level. And then by July of 2025, they anticipate having a new unified agency. That does not mean that it won't continue to change and that we won't continue to be living into new things, but that there will be one agency that combines both the mission and the ecclesial structure work of the church, which for many of us, that's a really wonderful thing, because as I said at the very beginning, the way we do our work is part of our theology, as is our mission. And so we get this chance to bring them together and say, all of this is how we live out being Presbyterian. A part of the Unification Commission is a subcommittee, sort of. It's a little separate, but they work very closely together. And that is the Funding Model Development Team. And the funding model team is working on looking at per capita and how we fund the structures of the church, and seeing if there are ways that may shift us away from a model that is reliant on membership numbers and looks at something differently. My understanding is that you are going to be one of the experimenting presbyteries. Yes, so you will be looking at new ways of how you fund. Overall, I would say that where they are looking at these experiments and engaging with those with lots of presbyteries over the next year or so. And then they'll be evaluating and saying, how is this effective or not in these contexts? That is a hard job, because every presbytery is different. Every culture of giving is different in each presbytery. And the realities of the needs of each presbytery for its work and then the denominational work are very, very different. So I am excited for you as you go into that, and also encourage you to have a lot of conversation with one another about how it's going, about the challenges you're facing, about the successes you're seeing. And one of the things that I've I've been able to talk with the funding model team about is that there's a little bit of this where no matter what the format is, what's going to carry it or not is the ability to talk with people about the importance of giving and the importance of a connectional church. That none of us do this on our own, that there is a reason that we have something like per capita or some sort of funding where congregations are not left out there, where the way that we all come together and contribute allows for something bigger to happen. It allows for presbyteries to support the work of the congregations. It allows for the denominational staff to support the work of the presbyteries. And in contexts where synods are strong, you have a pretty active synod. That's a big part of it too. So I encourage you as you're diving into this, again, to have conversations and to also remember that there is a reason for why we are thinking about this funding change, and there's a reason for why we fund the work of larger councils to begin with. And it's an important part of who we are as a connectional church. I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry. But I just want to hit on, I'll open up for some questions probably in just a second, but just to say that the assembly is not an agency. The office of the General Assembly is currently an agency, but the assembly is not an agency. It is a body of commissioners from across the country. And so you have people who are part of the General Assembly in your contexts, and they know a lot about what happened, and I think can bring a lot of energy and insight into the work that you're doing. So I encourage you to reach out to those folks who served as commissioners, to be in conversation with people about what it was like to be a part of the assembly, and to begin laying some groundwork, because the next one comes up real fast. It's not as fast as when we had a 1-year assembly, but 2 years goes really quickly. And if you have people who have never heard about the assembly in your congregation, they may not know that they could serve if they're an elder. So I encourage you to reach out to people and really have conversations about whether they feel like they might be the person to be considered as a commissioner. And especially as a young adult advisory delegate, whether or not there's a YAD out there who just doesn't know that this is an opportunity yet. So talk to the people who went before and have conversations, because it's really a transformative experience for many. And I just am so hopeful about how people may be transformed by serving and answering that call to be a commissioner or an advisory delegate, and then what comes out of that and how it impacts the church. So I will stop talking and invite any questions, or if there's anything, Steve, that you wanted to make sure I hit on that I somehow did not in those, 30 minutes.
I think you touched everything I thought of in advance. So yes, if folks have questions, I hope they'll ask. And you can raise your hand and I should be able to see you, in theory. Any questions, anybody? I see Kate has put the ogapcusa.org up, and she mentioned, I think it's just pcbiz.org.
Yeah, I could put that in there too. Yep.
I know that one of the hotter button issues you mentioned was EOL-1.
Mm-hmm.
There's more you want to say about that, or if that's just uh, whatever your
Yeah.
thoughts.
Leading up to the assembly, that was an item that was coming up that had a lot of conversation. If you follow either the Presbyterian Outlook, or if you are part of any social media groups for Presbyterians, that was huge. There were letters being written and a lot of conversation. We found that once the item got into committee and the resource people who were there to speak to it, and the overture advocates who were there to advocate for that. Once they all got into conversation, that um, some of that contentious spirit was not there. That it really was an open conversation to the implications of the item, to the spirit of the item, and they did some really thoughtful work of looking at specific language and how it might impact the Book of Order. And when it came out of committee and landed on the floor in plenary, there was not much conversation. So I think what that speaks to is that the committee did really great work, that the committee had a wonderful conversation, that they reached a place where they felt like no one had to necessarily compromise their beliefs or the things that were driving them, but they could find a way forward together that addressed everyone's needs, and did so in a way that would hold the church together as well. So it's really quite profound what they were able to do, compared to what was going into that committee. So you can go into that amendment booklet and see the exact language that came out of the assembly, or you can follow that in PC Biz. But I do think that where the assembly landed is a pretty good spot for where they came from, and that hopefully presbyteries, when you encounter that and are looking at voting on that, that you can see that work that went in, and are able to affirm or not. That's up to you, but that you can see that process and how they arrived where they did. Yeah. Ooh, Robert's rules. I see that in the chat. Yeah. So the Book of Order and Robert's rules serve varying functions, right? That the Book of Order is our constitution for the Presbyterian Church, and then Robert's rules informs how we do our meetings. The Book of Order does reference Robert's rules and says that this is something to be using. The standing rules of the General Assembly tell us to use Robert's rules for how we operate our meetings. So Roberts is definitely something to be familiar with and to engage with. What I do think is that Roberts is a lot more flexible than people give it credit for. So I used to think it was pretty rigid, and then had the privilege of hearing from folks like Trisha Dykers Koenig, who unfortunately is retiring at the end of the year, but will still be around. And learning really how Robert's rules can be a pretty expansive tool for how you have your meetings, particularly in sessions where you have a smaller body than, say, a GA committee, which has 50 people in it. When you are working with people that you know and you're in that smaller context, you can do things like have a committee of the whole where you're all just discussing together, and you don't have to be sitting in, raising your hand and being acknowledged, and everybody goes back and forth. And, there's some general good judgment calls that come out of Roberts, even in committee on the whole, like going back and forth between pros and cons. But that you can really just work together on an idea before you make a motion. And then once you make that motion, you can have something a little more solid to work with. The session I serve on, we are very casual about our Roberts rules, which is often a joke, that they worry that the Presbyterian police are coming, and then they realize I'm probably the Presbyterian police. And yeah, here we are. So I think Roberts becomes most useful when there is some sort of moment when things feel contentious, when there feels like there's something that's not clear, when there's not a consensus that arrives from the body. And it allows you then to be able to have something to lean on, so that you aren't the one making calls. I really appreciated that about it, where you're not, that it prevents people from having to be the bearer of that process, especially as clerks of session. When things are contentious, you do not want to have to be put in the position where you're perceived as pushing something one way or another, even if you're not. So Roberts can really help you walk through those moments, and allow everyone to feel heard as you move through those as well. So really, really useful tool, something that we are told to use, and I think rightly so, because it is so useful, but is a lot more flexible than maybe it seems from the first look at it.
Mm.
And I suppose I should also note that Robert's rules are not explicitly Presbyterian, right? So we make them work in our contexts and in our church, but the Book of Order is based on our theology in a way that Robert's rules will never be, because of where it comes from.
Any questions, folks? Well, I'll give you a moment to think as I add one more comment. Um, as I was scrolling through, because I try to save paper by not printing up all my stuff, I scrolled a little too far. And one of the things I neglected to mention is that Kate is a graduate of Louisville Seminary. Is that correct?
Yep.
And has her Master's of Divinity. But I want to emphasize she is a ruling elder. And I've
Yes.
never talked to her about this, and she may have gone into seminary thinking that's how it would go, or she may have had other plans and plans change. But for me, what's important about that, and it has nothing to do with her having an MDiv, but the thing I really want to stress is how important it is to have good ruling elders. Um, if it comes to who's bricks and who's mortar, you need pastors for certain things. But if you don't have elders, you have nothing. You've got somebody standing out on a rock talking to the birds, which it's just past St. Francis Day, and that's a wonderful thing. But that isn't the church. Um, and I have had the opportunity to meet with people in the committees on preparation for ministry that I've served for nearly 20 years now. Um, and occasionally people will go into the process, they're in seminary, and somewhere along the way, they think, I'm not sure God is calling me to this. Like I said earlier, they say, God, I don't know. And they wrestle with that because they've invested time and energy and money. And I will always say to them, the church needs good ruling elders as much as it needs another pastor. And if I don't want you to leave the church, but feel free to leave the track to becoming a pastor. And so I offer all of that to you, not because I'm encouraging you to go to seminary, but because you're here, which is a demonstration of commitment, and that you're a clerk of session, that's far more the communication of your commitment. And I just can't affirm that enough. I just can't. I'm glad to be a pastor. My life is different because of it. But there are hard days when I think, I could be really happy as an elder and do that work and not have to do that stuff. But that's what I was called to do. So I grit my teeth and I go on. But for you, never for a moment wonder if this was worth it or if this was a good idea, because we wouldn't be who we are without you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we haven't talked about that, and I went to seminary because I wanted to serve the church, and when I was at that point, looking, and I knew I wanted to serve either in mid councils or denominational levels, that congregational work was just not where I was feeling called to serve, and so I thought the only way to do that is to go to seminary, and only pastors get to do that work. Uh,
Mm.
and I've been around the church for a long time and been involved in a lot of national stuff at the church for a long time. And that still was the messaging that I was getting. And so it took maybe until my second year of seminary to start to see some things clicking where I realized that the education I was receiving was still integral to the work that I felt called to do. And I would not take that back at all. I'm really glad I made that decision. But that I realized one of the things that we believe as Presbyterians is that we have different ministries, but there aren't hierarchical ministries. That there isn't, a pastor and then an elder. Uh, that it's the same. It's all the same ordination, just to do different work. And I that became really important to me as a person and as someone who really believes in our Presbyterian polity and the way that we do things. And so it's sort of a point of pride that I take of saying, I'm not just an elder, right? That's a phrase that we hear a lot. Oh, I'm just an elder. But no, I am an elder, and that is just as important. So when I said that clerks are some of my favorite people, it's largely because you are people who are ruling elders who have said this matters to you, and are so committed, because I know if you're a clerk, you've probably been on session so many terms and have continued to re-up your terms even when you probably needed a break. So you are the people who keep things moving in so many ways. And the work that I do with the General Assembly doesn't happen without sessions functioning. So it's such a privilege to be able to be amongst ruling elders and the folks who keep this church moving.
So much of what Kate just said points back to the agreement with the Episcopal Church that she spoke of a little bit ago, because frankly, most denominations, even those with whom we're in a formula of agreement relationship, really don't understand us, because we are unique in that there isn't that hierarchy. And I'm not sure I'm aware of another denomination that's so explicit about that. Like for us, that has been a cross to die on. And people have really been in terrible struggles because folks just didn't understand. And yet it sounds like for Kate, and it definitely is for me, that's the foundation of who we are. Mm-hmm. We're all called, it's just to different things.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep Kate any longer than necessary, although you're welcome to stay with us if you'd like. But if there aren't any more questions, I would like to take this time to thank Kate again. You were everything I hoped for and more. And just really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Again, it's a joy to be with you all, and especially with folks from the Highlands, because it's a place that is near and dear to me. We all miss many of the things of New Jersey and my family. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and for being where you are and who you are. It's immensely important to this church. Yeah.
Well, if there's a favorite prodigal food I can bring next time I come to Louisville, you let me know.
I will let you know. My brother frequently asks for Taylor ham, so
Well,
that's a big one. Yeah.
it's ham. It'll last on a plane flight.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Kate.
Thank you.
Take care. And if the rest of you could hang around, I have a few specific things for you. And obviously, this is a time for you to ask any questions you might have. Um, we heard a lot about General Assembly, but just so you know, in particular, there are 12 amendments and then the one ecumenical agreement for us to vote on as a presbytery. And at this point, the plan, in fact, I can say for sure that we will be voting on all of these in 2025. And so you can look forward to that coming in the new year. Out of the 2022 General Assembly, we have a requirement of boundary training for everyone who sits on session. And many of you have been asking about that. I want to draw your attention. You've probably seen this, but if you haven't, October 17th at 7:30, there is going to be a Zoom webinar. And the link that's on public as of yesterday, I think, is to that Zoom webinar. And that will be hosted by Gregory Love, who is the uh, president and co-founder of Ministry Safe, which is a national organization, national company that we're still trying to hammer out the final nuts and bolts, but it looks quite likely that they'll be the folks we'll be working with for the next cycle. And we're just trying to figure out exactly how that can happen to benefit our churches the most. So that's really the conversation, not whether or not we'll use them, I think. But for those of you who have been paying attention, and you're clerks, so I'm assuming you've been paying a little attention, this was supposed to happen by really the end of 2023, because the Book of Order is finalized the year after the assembly. So they voted in 22. By the end of 23, voila, we were all supposed to have boundary training. Well, that didn't happen. I mean, it takes time just to research and figure things out. That's one of the hindrances of the way the Book of Order comes out. As soon as it's finalized, it's supposed to be done. Well, then we got into this year, 2024. And for those of you in Highlands, you know that we have been looking for a new insurer for the presbytery and for the New Jersey Partners, Presbyterian Insurance Partnership. Um, and so it took us some time for that to be finalized, which it was. And as a consequence, we were turned on to Ministry Safe. So, yes, we need to do this, but no, I'm not going to be unfair in my mind to say, well, you're going to find out about this in mid-October, and it better be done by the end of December. If you can do it, and we're doing everything we can to make that possible, then that's great. And I will probably have some way for you to reference. Well, you'll obviously be able to put whether you have it in 2024 or not. But you will not be required to have it until the end of 2025. Great if you can get everyone trained by the end of 2024, but understandable if not until the end of next year. Not happy about it, but I have to be realistic. As a consequence of this, there is going to be a change to the minute review form. And at the moment, it's really the only one that I am aware of. If there are others, I'll surely let you know. But what is going to happen is you're going to be asked to identify the pages in which, on which, from month to month, just looking out at the Zoom screen in front of me, Wendy Deutsch took boundary training in February. In the March meeting, the moderator or the clerk will say, has anyone done their boundary training since last time? And Wendy will raise her hand. We'll assume at this point that the moderator asked and you're not just talking to yourself. And in the minutes, it will reflect that in that month, Wendy took the training. And you'll do that every month, listing everybody on session, just the people on session who have taken the training since your last meeting. And then at your final meeting of the year, you'll have a cumulative list of all of the people that year that took the training. And the reason for that is, A, you've got to demonstrate to us that you've done what you've been required by the Constitution to do. But the other reason is really for you. We pray every day nothing ever happens that this is necessary. But if it does, you have a list at the end of the year of everybody, and it may even be helpful now to think about this for you to say, Wendy, parentheses, February, Bill Lowe, parentheses, August, so that you know exactly where to look. If you have to show your insurer, yes, these people all did it. In particular, this person that you have questions about, they did it. We've done all we can, and you're able to demonstrate it. So that's the change you can primarily look forward to in the manual, or the minute manual, as well as the actual review form. So again, Mark, October 17th, 7:30. Keep watching your email. Something went out yesterday. It may have been in the newsletter. Um, Boundary training is required every 36 months in the Book of Order. So if Evelyn takes it this year, she is not due for another 3 years, assuming she's still on session. So it's not every elder, it's elders who are sitting on session. So what will happen is you'll do it. We'll say the first time you do it, you actually get it in. Well, you have to get it in next year. So in 2025, someone is elected and they have to take boundary training. If they serve a second term, they will take boundary training again. So at most, you would take it 2 times in a row, and then you have to have a year off. And then if you come back, guess what? You get to look for it again. And so that's why we often move who provides these things, because we don't want you to have to do the same thing twice. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that if I preach in your church this Sunday, in a month, you're going to remember what I said, let alone 3 years from now. But we do try to make sure you get new information, different perspectives, new things happen that we learn. So every 3 years is what the Book of Order requires. The access to this recording is going to be available on the Presbytery website. And there'll be a kind of a review of what happened. It'll go out on the website. And if possible, you'll have the link there. And what is boundary? Is there a link? There is a Zoom link to watch it, and then there will be a recording of it available as well. We've made arrangements for that. What is boundary training? Boundary training covers child sexual abuse prevention training, and it covers some ethics. One of the things we're looking to require that has been advised of us is what's called peer-to-peer abuse prevention training, because, and I suppose when I thought about it, I realized, I guess that's true. It's not something I had to think about, but there are more and more cases of minors and other minors abusing other minors, children abusing children, young adults abusing younger adults. And so it's not just the well-known stories of pastors abusing parishioners where there's a power dynamic, or adults abusing children where there's a different kind of power dynamic. These are people who ostensibly are the same, two 13-year-olds, but one of them bullies the other, abuses another. And so there's a whole training on how to look for signs that this is happening. And I'm going through these trainings one by one just so I can tell you more about them. I don't want you to go into something that I haven't at least test driven myself. October 17th is the actual, or I'm sorry, it's the about the training, telling you what you can expect to happen. The training is for pastors. They are under a different cycle right now. They're doing it in this month. And Jean and I will have a training Zoom for them at the end of this month. And we have not talked about whether we would do something like that for ruling elders or not. But all of the, how do I want to say this? The training that ruling elders will be required to do, and the training that 4 out of 6 hours pastors have to do, is online at your discretion. So if you're a night owl and you wake up at 2 a.m. and, well, why don't I just do some boundary training? Knock yourself out. There's a test at the end. And I will tell you, you have to pay attention. Don't stress over it. It's the kind of thing that if you're really serious about it and you want to prevent these things, which I hope you all do, but I also know you're busy. So if you're trying to multitask, I think if you fail, they just make you take it again. But if you multitask, your odds of failing are much better. On the other hand, if you just pay attention, you have to get 72, 75% of the answers. And you can do that if you're just paying attention. Retraining is required regardless of the insurance company. Yep. This is not, your insurer is certainly on top of this. Don't you worry about that. But there's a greater calling here. The church has demanded this of everyone in leadership. And so okay, oh boy, lots of questions here. Right now, the trainings are about an hour each. You might be expected to do two, you might be expected to do more. We're trying to hammer that out right now. And in terms of youth group leaders, Sunday school teachers, what we are organizing, and somehow or another it's going to work out this way. So you can write this one down in ink. Anybody in your congregation who you require or who would like to take this boundary training can do so. It is not limited to the people on session and your pastor. They are the bare minimum, but you can ask all of your teachers, all of your volunteers. But I will say, and I'll have to make a note of this myself, if you're going to require all volunteers, all Sunday school teachers, all whoever, you're going to have to put it into your bylaws, because otherwise you really have no grounds to expect or demand that of them. So whether it happens immediately or months down the road, meaning you would, as long as you have access to the training, you can always require it of people once you get it into your bylaws. But you'll want to do that so that you've got some foundation for demanding this of them. Why are you making us do it? Because the congregation voted in its bylaws that if you're going to be a volunteer here, you have to do this. Now, what insurers have generally said, what the presbytery has generally understood, is the primary focus is on anybody who works with children. And ruling elders are built in as leadership, pastors built in as leadership, but Sunday school teachers, youth group leaders, people who volunteer with those groups, they would definitely be people I would highly recommend. But they aren't all required by the Book of Order. But you, as a congregation, led by your session, you can require it of whomever you want to. You'll want to think about, and we're still trying to work out the details on this, but the payment of the actual texts will be borne either by the church or if they ask the individuals to pay for it themselves. That's an internal discussion for your church. But they aren't, between the two tests I mentioned, that would be $10. It's $8 for the child abuse prevention. It's $2 for the peer-to-peer. And so it's not asking very much of either church or individual, but it does ask something. So that's the decision to be made. But that's the kind of thing you'll want to also include in your bylaws. Cost borne by who? Now, you want to be flexible, so costs will usually be borne by, so that if I come in and say, it's been a bad month, I don't have any money, the church may say, well, we'll pay for you. We want you to do it. We understand life's hard. Have that flexibility. But if you're going to ask everybody to do it, those are things you have to think about. And provide a link for the online training. If it didn't come out yesterday, you can look for it this coming week. It'll be out then on Fridays. Sonia and I spoke very late yesterday, so I didn't know if it made it or not. Who is the new insurer? It's, and I can never keep these straight. So I see Becky's here, so she may be able to keep this straight. Becky Moody, our treasurer. Thank you for doing that, Becky. Um, we are working with Brown and Brown and with Guide One, but I can never keep straight who's the agent and who's the whatever the other thing is.
Brown
Brown
and
and
Brown
Brown.
is the agent.
Brown's
Guide
the
One
agent.
is the carrier.
Okay, thank you. Oh, that's right. Then I see Lisa, who's on property insurance. She could have answered that too, and she works in insurance. So thank you both. So that's who we're working with, and that's part of the New Jersey
Presbyterian Insurance
Insurance
Partnership.
Partnership. Some churches are part of that. Some churches aren't. Um, we are working under the assumption that everyone is going to use the training that we're making available. But if your insurer provides something, all I ask for, and I've already gotten this question, is send me a list. And if there's a brief description of what's involved in your training, I'm more than willing to let you use your insurer's training. But if it's a 15-minute video, you're going to be doing our training. Um, and it's got to have some meat to it. This is just too important to not. Are you able to start and go back? Yes, you can. You can do that. And church bylaws with congregational vote, they're the best kind. So yes, you want to make sure it's legal in writing, and where anybody can find it if they're looking for it. If someone took training through their jobs and can provide proof, would that be considered training? I am thinking that would be true. I have to give it more thought than the 3 seconds I just did, but I know a lot teachers have to do this. A lot of people have to do training that may well be far more rigorous than what we're doing. So if you can provide proof of that to your congregation, you as the clerk would then say, Ralph, in May, provided a copy of his certificate showing he just took this training. And then you can consider Ralph good to go. Can individuals get a report that shows who in the church has completed the training? Well, session minutes are generally public. So if you're doing what you're going to be required to do, which is putting the names in the minutes, then someone could, in fact, look in the minutes and see someone else's name. Link to, oh, thank you, Jamie. Link to the October 17th Ministry Safe presentation. Excellent. Thank you. Month-to-month list of just who has done the training with that. Yes. Okay. What you are going to be required to do is only those ruling elders on session. That is what the Book of Order requires. Sunday school teachers, youth leaders, those are people who are under the purview of the session. I certainly would invite you to put all of their names in your minutes. That isn't required of you or won't be required of you. You definitely want to keep track of their names. If you keep it in a separate document, as long as you keep that document and keep it safe, as long as your session can verify these people have done the training. If you want to include that in your session minutes, I think that's a good idea, because ultimately those are the minutes that are the most legal. And so if something happens that a Sunday school teacher has written down in another document, they might go, well, that's nice to know, but that doesn't prove anything. So if you have it in your minutes, that will do it. But that would be a session's decision. Okay. So I think that's all I have on boundary training. The presbytery, does anybody have any questions they want to ask out loud about boundary training? Would they need to show proof of training and submit it? Well, if you're doing it through Ministry Safe, they have what they call a control panel where you can see it. You can see who's taken the test. I'm assuming they only show it when someone has passed the test. And so you could just look at it whenever you want, and you can just have it up on your screen and have a split screen and type in the names. You're good to go.
And on the ministry safe, whoever's administrator for your church will get an email too when somebody has passed the training.
Great, thank you. We have a couple of churches that have been using Ministry Safe for a while. So for specific questions like that, Lisa, feel free to jump in. And who has access? As Lisa said, the people who have been authorized to have access. And if you're talking about training and showing proof from something outside of Ministry Safe, yes. Every boundary training I've done, I end up with a certificate. Bring the certificate in, show the session, show the clerk. They can write down this was from, we'll call it Safe Ministry instead of Ministry Safe. Safe Ministry says that Bill Lowe, here's his certificate, what he did. That's good.
I have a question.
Yes, Nancy.
Last year we talked a lot about the manual of operations. Is this a
Mhm.
place where that record could be kept?
I think what would be in the manual of operations, if anything, is your process.
Okay,
Not you wouldn't have to keep the names of the
no,
people
just
there,
the process.
right? We're working with the Ministry Safe. Elders have the church is going to pay for elders to take the testing. The church is requiring Sunday school teachers, youth group leaders, and volunteers to take the testing. The authorized person will be the clerk of session to receive the reports and to access the control panel. That's a clerky kind of thing to do. Whatever details you have. If you'd say elders have to pay for their own training, but that in the operating manual. And that really becomes the meat of when you add something to your bylaws. You might not have to put all the gory details in, but then you can say, this is what the bare bones of we've decided, see manual of operations. Date, manual of operations dated, so that if they get out of whack, you can at least go back and find the right one. Anything else on boundary training? Joseph Young.
Yeah, so the question is, I just looked it up on the website and it talks about membership and single pricing. Are we automatically part of the membership or do we have to sign up as a church?
That's the kind of detail we're trying to hammer out exactly how that will happen. You as an individual church will have access to your control panel. It's whether the presbytery is paying for some of that and as a consequence has a super control panel, those sorts of details. But in terms of your church, you will have access. Being connectional is not just confusing to other denominations. It's confusing to organizations that are used to a more congregational, like Baptist organization, or used to the Episcopal or Catholic or Lutheran churches where their synod diocese, that's in charge. Where we're more collaborative, people don't understand collaborative, which is probably a sign of the world, unfortunately. But that's been part of the challenge is what we want to do is be able to, and we're talking about different ways of doing this, but being able to help financially with this. Because for some churches, $400 is the loose offering on a Sunday morning. And for some churches, $400 is a quarter of their monthly budget. And so how can we make this financially sustainable, particularly for those who are going to find it a little more challenging? Okay, we'll move on to the oh wait, there's another question. Is the October 17th required for current session members? October 17th is telling you what you can look forward to happening. October 17th is not the day you will actually be doing the training. You'll
Got
be
it.
learning about the training. And so once we sign on the dotted line, you can bet stuff will be going out telling you this is what you can do. And honestly, at this point, the dotted line is already printed. We just need to agree on the details behind it. The anti-harassment policy from the presbytery and an accompanying template for congregations was approved at our September presbytery meeting. And so you can find that material on the website at this point, which means by the time of December 31st, when your minutes are finished, you'd better have in there a date that says, we have an anti-harassment policy. Now, on one hand, it's like, well, is that really fair? It's October. Well, that means it's October and November and December, and you're working with the template. You can do it. I trust you. You just have to get it before your congregation. And you're coming up to that stretch where we have this annoying annual meeting to get ready for the end of the year and next year. And then you get to next year and you have to have another annual meeting. So you're in good shape. The anti-racism policy. The most important thing for you to make note of here is November 4th, 7 to 8:30 via Zoom. And I believe that email went out in some way or another within the past week or so, where Larissa Kwong Abazia is going to be speaking. And what she is going to do is not write your anti-racism policy. She's going to talk to you about how to have the conversation and then write your policy. Because anti-racism, it's so new. So many people are unsure of things. And people are all over the map on, do we need this, or we need stronger than you've ever seen? That it's really best for a congregation to come up with its own policy. And we may ask to see it, just to see what you said so that we can learn. Or we may not. But what's important is for you to have one and to demonstrate in your minutes that you have one. To the questions, you already have anti-harassment. I should have asked for questions about anti-harassment. But if you already have one, no, you don't have to change it. You might want to look at the template from the presbytery to see if there's something you didn't think of that you want to add. But if you have a fair and judicious anti-harassment policy, you don't have to meet our template, but you might want to use it. Anti-harassment or anti-racism policy required by the Book of Order? Yes. There is a long paragraph that now, it used to just say child abuse and protection policy, and I forget what else it said. Now it's, you have to have separate policies for prevention and abuse, abuse prevention, for anti-harassment, anti-racism, and a policy on boundary training. You have to have all of those. Anti-harassment go before, well, it's a policy of the church. So yes, they should all be part of your whatever the heck that thing's called.
I think we have that.
Good.
already.
Sorry? I think someone's helping me with the answer of my freeze, but They have to be in your manual of operations, and they have to be in your all your official documentation. Oh boy. Okay. Um, requirements for specific to Highlands or all presbyteries. Well, it's in the Book of Order, so it's all presbyteries have to have something. We are trying to provide something that bylaws is the word I was looking for. Reference to them in your bylaws. Different presbyteries may ask different things of you. I'm just telling you what Highlands is doing. We worked with other presbyteries in developing material for these. But for instance, I have not talked to any of my colleagues about my plan of requiring you to list monthly and then cumulatively everyone who has done the training. I may be just annoying to all of you, and it won't be the first time, and it won't be the last time. But I think it's important, so that's what we're expecting of you. Thank you, Jamie, for the anti-harassment policy. November 4th will be recorded. I was going to get to that. Thank you, Connie. The anti-racism policy, again, I would love to have you have it done by the end of this year. And Larissa is going to meet with you on November the 4th. So if you really were dedicated, if you got it done by the end of 2024, wonderful. But I don't think it's fair to demand that of you. And so I'm not happy about it, but I'm reconciled to it. What may happen with with all of these, the boundary training, the anti-harassment, the anti-racism, you may be asked to give a date where the review form says must be done by June 30th. So you wouldn't have to have it by December 31st, 2024, but you would have to have it by June 30th, 2025. And so you don't have all year to kind of procrastinate, and eventually we'll get to it, but it may be clear and present. And I said June because that's 6 months. I need to look at the calendar and see when Easter is and everything else. It could be earlier than that because you may have time. Clerks' lives are always busy. So in some ways, the holidays, it's just your life anyway. It's going to happen. So we'll see how that goes. You should make reference, John, to any policy in your bylaws. You have an anti-harassment policy. This is when it's stated. You have an anti-racism policy. This is when it's stated. You have that in your manual of operations. Does the Presbytery have anti-harassment and anti-racism policies? We have an anti-harassment policy that was approved last month, and the anti-racism policy may be ready for our November meeting. That's the plan last I heard, but we will definitely have one soon. So we in theory may be in violation, and we'll just take our lumps. Jamie Evans.
The bylaws thing, we really try hard not to do dates and stuff in the bylaws because then you're required to have a congregational vote every time you change a couple of words in your, in your, so is it okay to just have a generic statement like the church has all of the required policies according to the Book of Order, and they're part of your manual of operations, and then you refer it to the manual of ops?
As you say that, even when I was saying it, I was something that doesn't ring quite right there. No, follow Jamie's advice. Don't date it in your bylaws, but refer to what is in your manual of operations. But then you really do have to keep on top of the manual of operations as well. to make
Right,
sure
which is
it's
a
always
lot
up to date.
easier to accomplish.
Yes,
It doesn't require
thank
a
you.
congregational meeting to stay on top of your manual of operations.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you. Listen to Jamie, don't listen to me. Easter's late, it's April. I will give it more than a few seconds thought, but it's possible you might need it by the end of April. We'll just see. You don't usually have an annual meeting until February. Well, you submit your minutes for review. They aren't usually due, I think, until March that you need to start submitting them, hopefully. So if you have your meeting in February, just include a copy of the annual meeting minutes as a separate document so that we can see this thing happened, or that your reviewer can see this thing happened on December 31st. So that should hopefully cover that. You want to make sure that for the boundary training overview on October 17th at 7:30 and the anti-racism policy meeting on November 4th, if at all possible, be there or have someone from your church be there. You're the clerk, you don't have to be there, but somebody should be there. Yes, it will be recorded. So you have that. But what you can't do with a recording is ask a question. And so if somebody's there and they can ask a question, even if they don't, they know they could have. So if at all possible, have someone attend and take notes. And then you can come back and watch the recording, and whoever needs to. I'm assuming you probably will end up watching the recording at some point, just because you're all kind of the hub of communications. And when someone says, "What happened?" they're going to see Charles Bates and Charles, tell us what happened. So I've told you about the one change I'm aware of to the minute review form and when some of the deadlines are. I am coming up on finishing my 3rd year as the stated clerk. And there are a number of things that every review, the same thing happens over and over. So the first time a church does X, and I write back and say, I'm going to cut you some slack. It's my first time reviewing you, but next time, don't do X or do X. And then year 2 comes by, and then year 3, and it happens every year. So I am going to do a video. Gene is big into training videos. I can understand why, even if they pay me to do them. But I am going to walk through the minute review form. And hopefully it will either answer questions, provoke questions. Always email me, call me. I'm glad to answer. It's better to answer a question months ahead of time than to have to give you a strike. So hopefully the video will help to explain what I mean when I say this. Because fair or not, ultimately I'm the umpire. So if I look at it and go, it's close enough, fine. But oh, it's just outside. That's a strike ball. One of the things to make sure to add to your minutes, now I'm assuming this is true because otherwise you're in trouble anyway. But if you don't have this in your session minutes for 2024, maybe you still have October, it's pretty early. You definitely have November, and if you meet in December, you definitely have December. Make sure that your minutes reflect that background checks are required of your church volunteers. As you may have seen, your insurer might be asking you to demonstrate that this is being done. And including this information in your minutes is one of the ways to show it's been done. You don't have to list everyone who has a background check in your session minutes, But as the way you're going to have to do with elders and boundary training, you may choose to, but at the very least, you've got to keep a record, and you have to put in your minutes that background checks are required of all church volunteers. Again, if that is not your policy, then you need to call the congregational meeting now, because in 2 weeks that needs to be in your bylaws. I'm assuming it's there. You may have also seen recently, if it's gone out already, maybe it hasn't yet. We learned recently of a church that unexpectedly, because it's always unexpected, had a computer meltdown and everything was lost. And it turns out that this church was not doing computer backup. And so everything was lost, and they were asking the presbytery to provide stuff to fill in some gaps. But obviously, there are only so many things the presbytery has of your record keeping. If you lose your directory, church directory, if you lose however you keep track of giving, we can't help you. And you are in a lot of trouble. I mean, that's just a lot to recreate. So if you haven't seen it yet, you will see it soon, and you're hearing it now. Start backing up your computer. See, so that's what I'm going to do when we're done. I meant to back it up yesterday. I'm going to back it up this morning so that if the aliens come and steal my computer, my external drive will have everything on it. Right now, you can expect the same timetable and same mechanism of reviewing the minutes. So whatever we did last year, you can be pretty sure it's the same this year. I think it was the end of March that we started asking people to submit their minutes. We definitely would love it if that happened. You can exchange PDFs of your minutes through Sonia. You can meet with a good friend who's a clerk in person. That's great. You can meet with several good friends who are all clerks and read each other's minutes. It can be a party. And we will be reaching out probably to Hackettstown again to ask if we might have a Saturday morning or afternoon when we could read minutes together for whoever would like to join together. So those mechanisms will all be possible. And like I said, the same time frame, and that includes the deadline. So I think we were June 1st, earlier this year was the deadline. You can pretty much expect that to be the case this time too. Again, I understand that for some people, life is busy, but we're talking 5 or 6 months to do 4 pages of review. So on one hand, I'm sympathetic, and my pastor's heart is, oh, but people are busy and they have lots of things to do. But my clerk's heart, and working with Sonia, who has to follow up with people if they aren't turning them in and it's November, that isn't fair to her, and it really isn't fair to me either, honestly. So trying to split the difference, aim for June the 1st. And again, this is something that if you do it by swapping PDFs, you don't even have to leave your house. You've done your boundary training earlier this week at 3 a.m. You're awake again at 3 a.m. Why don't I start my minute review? If we currently do we need to let's see. If it's in your minutes, then you don't have to reaffirm them. But if it's not in, if your harassment policy is not in your minutes, you'll want to put it there. And as I have suggested, at the January meeting, have a list of all of the contents of your manual of operations, because there you can list that you have an anti-harassment policy. And if you put the date in there, which again I recommend, that's not changing the bylaws with the congregational vote. That's just saying next January when you are listing the contents of your manual of operation, instead of saying 2024, you updated them in 2025. Okay, Microsoft 365 Cloud Services Auto backs up, then you are set as far as you trust these things to be healthy and useful. I have to admit, and I've tell many of you this in my emails, I really don't trust technology. So the
Nope,
fact that
nope.
something works today does not mean it'll work in an hour. So, but if that works for you, as long as you have a backup, that's all we're asking. Does the presbytery provide assistance with doing background checks? Um, that's one of the things we need to talk to Ministry Safe about. Right now, I believe you contact Sonia. Sonia does the background check, and you get the information, and you pay the presbytery. I believe with Ministry Safe, you would be doing that yourselves. You would apply for the background check. You would pay directly for the background check. But I have to admit, that's the kind of thing where I'm looking forward to the meeting when Sonia meets with Ministry Safe, because those are the sorts of things she thinks about and asks about.
I can just say on the background checks with Ministry Safe, we haven't started them yet because we're holding off to see what happens. But they will do them and you pick the level you want. And then it goes into that same database of showing what trainings people have done. So you could have like one print off at the end of the year that shows that everyone has their training and their background checks done.
Oh, terrific. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
So we'll see how things go with Ministry Safe, but right now we're talking about having them do that work for us as well. And as far as the different levels go, I think that will be part of the conversation. We might require one level, and you might feel like a stronger level is necessary, and you can make that decision. You just couldn't pick a level less stringent than ours. Background checks, if we're in the process of getting them, but they aren't completed, I wouldn't put anything in until it's completed.
Okay.
Yeah, I that would be my recommendation. Who needs the background check? Any church, school volunteers, youth group leaders, volunteers who work with them. I would need to look at the policy, to be honest. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know if there's anybody here who has committed that part to memory or just happens to remember it. Who would I consider a volunteer? Well, again, if you're talking about volunteers who work with children, that strand of volunteer. So if you're at a soup kitchen, if you have one in your church, that would not necessarily be someone who has to have a background check or do the training. But if you are a soup kitchen where you have a lot of kids, then you're going to want to do it. So you're going to have to be judicious in your thinking. Jamie.
We are not part of the insurance coalition or whatever, I forget what it's called. And our insurer does not require background checks. So we only do that for our staff. Where is this, like, where can I go to reference that requirement so that I can bring that up at a session meeting?
I honestly would have to look on the website to see where we have and what we have. And I guess I'd recommend you check there, because it could be that in our many discussions about this, we don't have that they are required. Volunteers are not required.
Okay,
And I
'cause
may
that's
be just
not-
sharing
that's
that because that's
definitely
a
not
best
gonna be in-
practice.
That's definitely not going to be in my minutes.
Okay.
We've never required that. We have done training. but we've never required background checks of volunteers, so that's new to me.
That may be a best practice, but not a require.
There was an
And that's
email
what I
that
have to see.
there was an email that came out, I don't know, in the last week or 2 weeks from Presbytery about background checks. And I thought the requirement of them. I'll try and find it and when it came out, but I know there was something that came out recently.
That would be really helpful, because I don't know how, I need to look at that to see how that impacts us, because we are definitely not doing that.
If Lisa's able to find it, thank you. And if not, you may need to send me an email to look for it, because I may not remember when this is over that I agreed to do it, but I'll try
Okay,
to look
thank you both. I
for who
appreciate
is
it.
required. And again, if anybody finds it and it doesn't say volunteers, then you only have to do what's required, and I may be just parroting best practices.
Well,
But
and it
generally
may be
speaking,
required by that insurance company. It's just that because we're not in that yet, because we were with somebody else when that
right.
all happened.
Mhm.
That could be something that we need to do once we join that, but right now, it's not happening.
Sure. Well, every day we learn something that could be happening differently than it is. So I don't know is still a good prayer.
Thank you.
Of course. If we do background check through Ministry Safe, we most likely wouldn't most until sometime. Well, if you have background checks done for people who are currently required to have them, then you're okay. And then 2025 would be starting with anybody who needs to have a background check. And one of the things we're talking about, because honestly, I hadn't really thought about it, is if you do a background check today, when do you need a background check again? Do they expire? Do we just assume you're a perfect citizen now and you're not ever not going to be a perfect citizen? Do we check that every 5 years, every 10 years? I don't know. So that's something that may be new, or at least new information for us.
I found the email. It was sent out on the 24th of September. And it said insurance update, but it says how Guide 1 is focused on assisting with making the congregations fully covered. Part of that includes your church having a sexual misconduct or protection policy. And included in those policies are requirements for background checks for church staff and volunteers working with children. So it's more related to the Guide 1, but I was taking it because we're not part of the group either. But I was taking it as like that child protection policy should include that.
Mm. Thank you, Lisa.
Just a good
You're welcome.
idea.
Yeah,
We're
because
talking
and this comes up with the Ministry Safe people, and I can feel kind of wounded and kind of chastened, because I'll be talking to them and saying, well, yeah, but we're trying to find a way to make this financially feasible for our churches. And every once in a while, they'll gently say, we understand that. But the important thing is we keep the kids safe, not the finances of it. And for me, it's a balancing act of I'm trying to care for you, but ultimately they're right. I mean, if every church had to pay $1,000 a year to get everything done because it would keep every child safe, I would probably be recommending that to the presbytery. I mean, I wouldn't want to have you all spend 1,000, but if that's what it took. So yes, it may not be required, but gosh, we want to do everything we can to keep people safe, not just children, anybody. And so to Debbie's question about thrift shop, volunteers are never alone with children. That's one of those things where, again, if someone works with children on a regular basis, so if you have once a year, you do something, I don't know that you need, and it's in a public place. So it's a Halloween event coming up on October 31st, and it's well in the public. Um, I wouldn't say every person there has to have a background check, but you have a thrift shop every Saturday. Well, it's nice to say volunteers are never left alone with children, but we can't really say that. We can't guarantee that. We can't. Someone looks out the window and some little kid is walking off by themselves and they walk out to save them from being hit by a car. But it was an adult alone with a child. And they may have saved them from being hit by a car. That doesn't mean they aren't going to do something terrible. So I would say anyone who is consistently in a place where children are present. One of the changes to the Book of Order is adding vulnerable adults. So that's a new explicit addition. Doing a background check on them. And again, we may come up with a level you have to do. I'm not as familiar with that part of it yet to be able to say. You have to be at least as stringent as we say, and you can be more stringent if you want. Anti-racism policy specific to racism, or is it a more general anti-discrimination policy? I will be honest, I read the last draft a few weeks ago. I think it's pretty much specific to racism. The Book of Order was very clear. You had to have anti-racism policy, anti-harassment policy, child abuse prevention policy. Each one is a policy. So I would say it is not a general anti-discrimination, but I would strongly advise no one discriminate against anybody. If we need a policy for that, that works. Good. Thank you, Lisa. If you look in the chat, Lisa has put the background check policy in the chat. So you can see exactly what we say. Does anybody have any additional questions or comments they'd like to make while we're all together? Going once, going twice. Well, I want to thank you all for being here today. I think Kate really helped sum things up a lot, which I'm grateful for. And we certainly were able to cover a lot of ground and just the sorts of things you, in particular, if you're from Highlands Presbytery, will be expected to do. Is there a sample of the anti-harassment policy? I would think, because the Presbytery meeting was almost a month ago, that our Presbytery policy and the template that is part of it are somewhere on the website.
I put it in the chat earlier. Do you want me
Oh,
to
did you?
find it again?
If you put it in the chat, I would just encourage Sheila to either scroll back in the chat. And if you do that while I'm praying, I trust God will understand. And if you aren't able to do it, let's go on the website. Is it usually in the search engine? If you just typed in the word harassment, and if you can spell it right, because I often get my R's, multiple S's confused. But the search engine should pop it up, all things about harassment. But as I try to remind people, these are anti-harassment, anti-racism policies. We do not have a policy on racism. Okay, great. Thank you, Evelyn. Wow. Brownie points. Thank you. Okay. Well, I don't see any hands up. So I'm going to trust you're all feeling pretty good. Or if you're not, you're just keeping it to yourselves. So I guess I'll just end with saying something I said a few minutes ago. I work for you. So when you have questions, when you aren't sure about something, if Solomon can say, I don't know, the rest of us can say, I don't know. Never worry about sometimes you'll call and, oh, I'm sorry to bother you. this is why I'm here. I don't think of it as being bothered, but it's why I'm here. So if you've got a question, just reach out. And hopefully when it comes to the minute review, the video will help a little bit. Good. Thank you all for being here. And let's have a word of prayer, and I will let you get out into what I hope is still a sunny day for you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. Gracious God, thank you for blessing us with this day, this time to be with folks who are walking the same road. It's always a blessing to have companions on the way. Bless each of them. Bless the sessions and the congregations that they serve. May they be strong when necessary and able to admit when they don't know something, when it's true. And may we all trust in your abundant grace, guiding us day by day onward toward your promised kingdom. We pray this even though sometimes it's hard to see. The road is bumpy. But thanks be to God and God's Son, Jesus. Our yoke is never so heavy. We pray this in his name. Amen.